So let's start with December 11th, 1941, Berlin, Germany. Adolf Hitler declares war on the United States. 5 weeks later, January 15th, 1942, New York Harbor, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. 27-year-old Reinhard Hartigan, commander of the German U-boat, submarine, undersea boat, U-boat, number 123, climbs up through the hatch and onto the conning tower, and he's staggered by the luminous spectacle that unfolds before him. The sky is ablaze from the incandescence of Manhattan and its neighboring boroughs. A huge silver scrim thrown up by a million lights. To the north is Rockaway Beach. Further on, slightly to the left, is Coney Island. He sees automobile lights snaking along the shoreline and a Ferris wheel in the distance silhouetted against the sky glow. Behind Coney Island is Brooklyn, and that must be Staten Island ahead in the distance, with a vertical string of red lights that indicates a radio tower. Having visited the city once as a tourist, Hartigan can appreciate better than anyone else on board the U-boat the feat that they have just accomplished. Setting out from the French coast, traveling 3,000 miles through the frigid North Atlantic, undetected by American or British ships or planes, they are now an enemy force on the front doorstep of the greatest city in the world. I cannot describe the feeling with words, Hartigan would write later, but it was unbelievably beautiful and great. I would have given away a kingdom for that moment, he wrote, if I had had one to give away. For the first time in this war, a German soldier looked out upon the coast of the United States. But at the same time, said Hartigan, the city irritated him because all its lights were glowing, while in Germany it was dark. Didn't the Americans know there was a war on? Yes, Pearl Harbor had been bombed a month earlier, and yes, Hitler had conquered much of Europe, but so far the American mainland had been mostly untouched, and Americans were going about their business as they had before the war, eating out, going to movies, Broadway shows, staying out late at jazz clubs. There were no blackouts along the East Coast because theater owners and restaurant owners didn't want to shut down their businesses. So that the 5 U-boats that arrived in American waters in January of 1942 had easy pickings. One merchant ship after another was sent to the bottom. These were ships carrying oil from the Caribbean and moving up to New York, and they were supposed to head across and deliver it to England. Rubber from South America, coffee, chocolate, anything that would come up from the Caribbean would be sailing along the East Coast before heading across the Atlantic to England, and these were the ships that were being attacked by the U-boats. Every few days, burned bodies, black oil, and soggy wreckage washed ashore from New Jersey to Cape Hatteras, all the way down to Jacksonville, Florida. Where was the United States Navy? Good question. They were in the Pacific, trying to stop the Japanese warships from moving eastward. What about the Coast Guard? Well, they lacked the manpower and the boats to patrol 1,500 miles of coastline. But amidst all the carnage of that winter and spring, 215 miles to the north of New York City, on the roof of a secret and well-guarded radiation laboratory at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, a team of physicists, mathematicians, and engineers had built America's first microwave radar. England had built one as well. And that transmitter on the roof of the Rad Lab had sent back echoes of a building across the Charles River. That was in January of 1941. And then 2 months later, on March 27th, 1941, the first microwave radar set was installed in an Air Corps bomber And while flying off the shore of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, the radar on that plane detected a ship 8 miles away. And that was the beginning. In the end, it would be microwave radar that would help end the U-boat threat in the Atlantic. Now, this is a personal story for me because in January of 1944, my dad was on a troop ship sailing from the east coast of the United States over to London, where he would begin training for the D-Day landings. And he was in the second wave of the 29th Infantry that landed on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. Now, I'm sure that neither he nor any of the 6,000 other troops that were on that ship knew what amazing technology had been invented to assure them of a safe passage. But after hearing his stories as a kid, I was curious, and many years later, my quest sent me back to the earliest breakthroughs that led to the development of radar. I thought it would be a great story for kids, middle grade, middle school, high school readers. So then the question became, how do I tell this story to younger readers? Now, I'd been and still am teaching part-time in a 5th, 6th grade classroom. I know my audience. I've read many books over the years to my students, and the ones that have held their attention for the most part have been historical fiction. And that's easy to understand because it's character-driven history. It's not merely a recounting of discoveries or battles. But I'm a nonfiction guy. At least I haven't been comfortable creating stories. I like to take real stories that have happened and create a narrative around them. But in order to make that work for young readers, it always helps to have a real character to propel the narrative. Even better if they're kids. And luckily, midway through my research on the Battle of the Atlantic, and when I say midway, I'm talking about 2 years, I came across a footnote in one of the nonfiction books I was reading, and it mentioned a book called In Peril on the Sea, published in 1984. I found a copy online, and bingo, it was the true story of a mom and 4 kids whose cargo ship had been torpedoed in the South Atlantic in 1942, and they all had survived aboard a raft for 20 days before being saved by, wait for it, radar. Even better was the fact that all of them had written accounts of the ordeal. So I was off and running, spending many hours thinking about how to integrate these 2 stories, radar and the raft, and my editor at Charles Bridge, Karen Boss, pushed hard, making sure that my transitions from one story to another, or in some cases from one century to another, were as smooth and as cliffhanging as they could be. The science segments were, of course, full of great characters. Volta, who invented the battery after studying the insides of a torpedo fish that zapped its prey with an electric jolt. Hans Christian Ørsted, a Danish physicist who was the only man in history to make a major scientific discovery in the middle of a classroom lecture. That's when he happened to hold a compass next to an electrified wire. And you know what happened, right? The compass gyrated wildly, leading Ørsted to make the connection between electricity and magnetism, 2 of the fundamental forces of nature, the third one being gravity. Ørsted's discovery led to Michael Faraday inventing the first device that turned electrical energy into mechanical energy. Today we call that an electric motor. James Maxwell came along and turned Faraday's non-mathematical discoveries into equations, which could then allow the experiments to be duplicated. Then Hertz took Maxwell's equation. Heinrich Hertz took Maxwell's equations and figured out how to transmit the first electromagnetic wave. And then Marconi came along and figured out that electromagnetic waves could be used to detect ships at sea. They would bounce off the ship and show up on a cathode ray tube back at the receiving station. That's how the little raft at sea that the mom and her 4 kids were on was discovered by a British ship. The electromagnetic wave bounced off. They had put up a mast on they used an oar and a piece of tarp to set up a sail, so they had kind of a mast there, and the electromagnetic wave bounced off that, and they were detected at sea. And that's the story of radar and the raft. Now, finally, if any of you out there would like to follow in Michael Faraday's footsteps, you could recreate one of his famous lectures on the history of the candle. These lectures, by the way, Faraday gave at the Royal Institution, and they were the best entertainment in London. Harder tickets to get for those lectures than tickets for the West End shows that were going on at the same time. And Faraday said there's no more open door by which you can enter into the study of natural philosophy than by considering the physical phenomena of a candle. He would begin by asking his audience, how and why do candles burn? And here you might light a candle to show your students. Ask them to describe the color, the shape. What changes occur? What about the wick? What is its function? Describe the wax, and why does it melt? Faraday called the disappearance of a candle as it burned a very curious circumstance. Ask your students, why does the candle disappear? And what does it produce as it burns? And then depending on the grade level, you can get into discussions of combustion and gas and the fact that a candle produces both water and carbon dioxide as it burns. The word equation would be fuel plus oxygen equals heat plus water plus carbon dioxide. And in this way, you can get students to look at a burning candle as a process rather than an object. So thank you. Radar and the Raft and the History of a Burning Candle, courtesy of Michael Faraday.